Good afternoon and welcome to Chris 180's Lunchtime Live series. I'm Chandra Luckett, Chris 180's Marketing Officer, and I am so excited that you have decided to spend part of your Friday afternoon with us. Did you know that November is National Homelessness Awareness Month? Each day, thousands of Georgians, people we know and see every single day, are struggling to find a place to live or a stable home for themselves or their children. Chris 180 works every day to provide support, housing, and resources to children, youth, young adults, and families who are living on the street or who do not have stable housing. But there are many myths and stigmas that come with people experiencing homelessness. Today, we want to take a look at those myths and also lean into what each one of us can do to provide essential support to those in our community. Our panelists here are experts in this field, and we are grateful they have spent their Friday afternoon with us. Introducing our panelists, we have Jenna Lee, who is the interim director of our Outreach and Community Housing Program, with Anthony Bostic, who is the program manager of Chris 180's Drop-In Center. We have Les Canty, who is a case manager at the At Promise Youth and Community Center on the West Side. And we also have Melissa Baumann-Fletcher, who is a clinical program manager of Chris 180's School-Based Mental Health Program. If you have questions or comments you want to put in the chat, please do so and we'll answer your questions live. We'll kick things off with Jenna.
Hi, like Chandra said, my name is Jenna. I'm the interim director of our Outreach and Community Housing Programs. We work mainly with the literally homeless population, linking them to both emergency shelter interventions and also that permanent housing piece through the rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and the bridge projects that we have.
And I'm Anthony Bostic, program manager of the Spot Drop-In Center. We serve emerging adults 16 to 26 that are experiencing homelessness and other vulnerabilities. We work very closely with OCH Jenna's program, and where she focuses on permanent housing, we focus on finding shelters and temporary housing, as well as other supports to support housing, like getting vital records, therapeutic services, life coaching. I'm also the manager of the Distribution Services Center, where we help to address the food deserts that we currently have, where some of our programs are housed, and do community food distributions and other resources to both our clients and for people in the community.
I'm Melissa Baumann-Fletcher. I am a clinical program manager for Chris 180's School-Based Mental Health Program. We partner with 70 different schools in the metro Atlanta area to provide mental health services and supports inside the schools, pre-K through 12, for students and their families. And I also had the honor of serving as the therapist for the Transitions Program at Chris 180, our permanent supportive housing program.
Good afternoon. My name is Les Canty. I work at the Promise Center. I'm one of the case managers there. Some of my responsibilities are going downtown and feeding the homeless and also doing wellness checks. Also help in the community. We also feed the community too. So another part of my duty is that we take inner city kids and we take them hiking, camping, we ride in the Beltline with our bicycles. We're about to do fishing and stuff like that. So, what does homeless look like? So for me, downtown, I think some of the things that people think homeless is that they think that they're lazy, that they think that they don't want to work, that they want a handout, that they're always on drugs. I think some of those may be true, but it's a position where they don't have any care. I think that I believe that as human beings, we have a level of care that we show people. But once we see that a person is homeless, somehow we compartmentalize that to where we don't have to show them care. There's a gentleman that was in the camps about 6 months ago that I knew, and he was a person that was working. He was a person that was in the neighborhood, and it kind of broke my heart just to see him living in a tent now. And he was the farthest thing from being lazy. It was someone that I would see, we would talk about baseball at the water cooler at work. This was someone that we worked a really, really good job. So I think there's a lot of negative things about what we say about the homeless and it's really towards the poor. It's almost like we don't really care about the people who are poor.
Yeah. And I know it can look different across various types of populations. You know, I know our youth homelessness community, sometimes homelessness looks different than that. You know, we do see them sleeping outside and under the bridges, but mainly it's not as in your face. You know, they kind of take care of each other. You know, couch surfing is a very common thing in that population as well. You know, then we have the people who are on kind of a different end of the spectrum where, you know, they have instability inside their housing, you know, so that paycheck to paycheck, you know, we have to be kicked out of the place that we're staying in a week, where am I gonna go? So even though there's technically a roof over their head, it's not stable, safe, you know, any kind of that situation, so, yeah.
When I give tours of the Spot Drop-In Center, I'm often asked, like, what are the top 3-4 reasons why our young people are experiencing homelessness? And it's always difficult for me to ask because there really isn't 2 or 3 reasons. It's all over the board. But what I push back with is, when you were a teenager, when you were a young adult staying with your parents or staying with family, what would that experience have to have looked like for you to choose to sleep in the cold, hungry, and on the street rather than staying in your mother's house one more night? And for everybody, that's going to be different. And a lot of people can't even imagine it. But is it, you know, having cigarette butts put out on your body? Is it being told that you're ugly and trifling and just like such and such, or just like a parent every single day? Is it being traded for drugs, being traded to provide sexual favors for your family to get drugs? Or are you parenting your parent and taking care of your siblings? I mean, it can look very different. But the truth is, for some of our young people who have left their homes, it is traumatic enough for them to make that choice. So not just because I have a 9 o'clock curfew. You know, it's going to be something greater than that. Even though it's 2021 and there's a lot of acceptance in the area, we still have a lot of parents that are rejecting their children because of their sexuality or because of their gender identity. And a lot of young people are being put out for that. We also have issues with mental health. It's huge. And then we also see a lot of young people who age out of foster care. And we may question their decision to sign out at 18, but I know when I was 17 and 11 months, I was ready to go out of my parents' house so I could do what I wanted to do. And so there's just a thing of when you're 18, 21, when you're grown, you just want to go. And if you're in a placement like a group home or foster care that you hate, that you don't even understand fully why you're in, then you are anxious to leave again. So I don't fault them for that, but they may sign out of care, life goes wrong because they sign out very idealistically. Things don't go that way most times, and then they end up being in a position where they're experiencing homelessness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think this last year too, everything that's happened with COVID and, you know, the impact on jobs and everything else, I think what homelessness looks like right now is, one, I think a lot more people are, it's coming to their forefront of awareness because it's hitting closer to home now. There's a lot of families that are one paycheck away. There's a lot of people who continue to show up to work every day. You know, no one around them knows that anything changed, but maybe now they sleep in their car. Mm-hmm. It looks, you know, like the college student who still never misses a day, but, you know, never eats at school because, you know, there's no funds there, but no one really, you know, follows up once the day is over. It looks like so many different things, and I think, you know, we just never really know what someone is going through.
Yeah. Yeah, especially those stereotypes that come into play sometimes, you know, like, well, do you really need to help if you have nice clothes on, or, you know, if your hair is done, if you have nice shoes? It's like there has to be a picture of homelessness in order for someone to believe that they're actually going through something. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too, because then I think people hold that against them at the same time. Like, you have to look a certain way, but then if you do look a certain way, you know, like, it must be your fault that this is happening to you. Like, if you wanted something different, you could do that, and that's just not the case.
And to that point, with our distribution, our bi-weekly distribution that we have, we're utilizing a lot of volunteers, and volunteers have come up and they've said, well, that woman just pulled up in a Cadillac. She doesn't need food. And I'm like, well, it could be a rental car. It could be a car that she borrowed. It could be where she's sleeping right now. It could be slated for repossession next week. You know, it's like we can't just assume that just because they have nice clothes, just because they're in a Cadillac, that they are well off and everything is fine. That may be, again, a number of different reasons as to why they're pulling up in that Cadillac, but they're coming up here to get free food.
Yeah.
Right. I think downtown in some of the campus, there was a young lady and she gave me her story. And basically it was, hey, I was working a job, that job moved. From there, I think she was staying in a very nice apartment, and she went down to a very low-end apartment, and she was staying there for a while, and then a tree fell on the roof, and the landlord wouldn't fix the housing, so she had to move out of there. Then she went into a motel. Then from a motel, she went into a shelter, and then the shelter only gave her like X amount of days before she was able to find a place. And so she had to send her children, to live with other family members. And then she had made that decision, hey, I probably want to be, sleeping in the street. So, yeah, it kind of goes against the stereotype that, hey, this is what they chose to do. You know what I mean?
And we've had at least 8 young ladies since June to come to OCH and the Spot Drop-In Center, escaping domestic violence. And that's another way that homelessness looks. You're trying to escape domestic violence, especially with your children. You don't have a lot of resources. You can't go back to what you called home because it presents a danger. And I had a young lady who I just admire so much. She escaped domestic violence from her child's father. She has 3 young kids. She had a car. She was sleeping in her car with her kids. Her car broke down and needed repair. So she signed up for one of the rideshare programs and got a car through them. And while her kids were in daycare and elementary school, she was driving enough for rideshare to keep the car so that she could keep and maintain housing for her and her kids. So this is a young lady who's really trying, who's trying to be creative. She's not, out just asking for handouts. She's trying to find ways to be able to do that. She attempted to find an apartment, and everything was fine except she could not show 3 months worth of income. So the apartment for the 2-bedroom for her and her 3 kids was $1,200. She couldn't show that she was making $3,600 a month, so she couldn't get an apartment. Meanwhile, she's now working in a warehouse job making $21 an hour. She still doesn't have the pay stubs to get approved for the apartment. And so that's the stumbling block. And now she is signing up and is in process of being onboarded to become a police officer with one of the local police departments. So she is working hard, she is trying hard, she's putting everything into it, but there are just barriers that, are against her, and starting with, a domestic violence situation. But she's determined. And what I do want to say, what homelessness looks like, it looks like a lot of honest, hard-working people that have hit hard times. They may have made some bad decisions may have been made for them, they may not have appropriate family. There are homeless people experiencing homelessness that fit all the stereotypes, right? There are those, but there are far many, as Melissa kind of pointed out, there are far many that don't represent those stereotypes, and they really are trying, and that their experience with homelessness will be temporary because they're determined to make it happen, and we're here to provide those supports.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of another, speaking of domestic violence, because we all know that the domestic violence rates, rocketed during COVID, everybody's at home, and I think, a lot of people are, building up the courage to leave, and so we're seeing a spike of people coming who are fleeing certain situations, and, I met one woman recently, and she pulled up in a very nice car, but, domestic violence kind of looks, her husband provided her with all of these things, trying to keep her and her kids from leaving. And so she pulled up in a nice car, but it's like he bought it for her in order to keep her here, so now she's living out of a car, she had a teenage boy. She tried to get into the shelter wouldn't let the boy come with the mom because he was 14. Boys, I guess, are deemed a certain level of dangerous at a certain age according to certain shelters, so they had to split their family up, so it's, these women are gaining courage to leave, but it's hard for them to access services once they do leave. But, yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about the mental health reasons maybe people experiencing homelessness face different challenges. And if each of you could speak up a little bit. I know we're having some folks with audio problems, but we're working just like that. Go ahead.
I think it's one of those, it's like a chicken or the egg situation, right? Like, we don't know a lot of times which one comes first. Like, one of the stereotypes for someone experiencing homelessness is substance use, is mental illness, is all of these, picturesque things that we hear about. But also on the other side of that, what would it be like to live every day knowing that, if for some reason your car breaks down and you can't make it to work for one day, like there's your housing, right? Like the incredible amount of anxiety and stress and pressure, kids, that are moving from place to place or hotel to hotel, shelter to shelter. What does that do to, their school performance? So it's not just, we see it on both ends. Sometimes, having a substance use disorder or having a mental health, diagnosis, like, of course, there's challenges with that may lead someone to having difficulty with maintaining a job, to maintain stable housing. But then on the other side of that, this last year with COVID, we know that, I think I saw a study, something like almost 80% of school-age children now could meet criteria for a mental health diagnosis. That is incredibly high. So it's both and.
Yeah, and then we talk a lot about Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like without stable and safe, secure housing, no one can really go to work every single day. No one can address their mental health concerns or issues. No one can get sober, so a shelter system is not safe and stable housing. It's literally just a roof over your head because it's 30 degrees outside and I can't sleep outside tonight, So it's until you have like a key that you can put into the lock and it's yours and you know that you're safe, you're not having to answer to anybody or do anything you don't want to do in order to stay there. Only then can someone then kind of work on all of these other intersectional barriers that they have.
And we have a lot of work to do in terms of educating people on mental health and the impact of mental health. You see a paraplegic in a wheelchair, you don't say, well, why can't you walk? Why can't you get up and walk? But yet we hear that somebody's diagnosed with, severe depression. Well, why are you always sad? Just go through it and do it. Just push through. It's like mental health is real and it shows up just as much as physical health may show up, and it can be debilitating and it can be hard. And so some people, like with domestic violence, domestic violence weighs down your self-esteem, it weighs down your energy level, you have no resources. In a lot of DV cases, you have been strategically isolated from your family, from your support system. So it's not just as easy as just leave him, or just get up and go do something. It's like mental health is real, and we have more education to do to help people understand the impact of that. That if I am literally suffering from severe depression, that is going to show up in how I raise my kids, it's going to show up in how I interact with my family, and it's definitely going to show up in how I come to work and how I perform at work. And we just have a lot more work to go to just understanding the impact that mental health has on day-to-day life.
I think for my first day that I went out into one of the encampments, it was during COVID, there was no one driving. Downtown was actually like a ghost town. The only people who were out there was me and a lot of the people who were looking for, some kind of shelter. I went up and climbed up a hill. I had a box full of food, and I saw a man just throwing haymakers at a girl and just was hitting her. And, I yelled at him to stop, like, hey, and he looked at me. I was like, hey, you're not going to get any food if you keep hitting this, young lady. And he stopped, and I, went to her. You can tell that she had been, beaten before. Her eyes were black, and you could tell that, emotionally she was just not there. And throughout my course, I saw how women were just, how they were just mistreated out in the camps and stuff like that, and how they could just be triggered. You could just knock on their tent, for them, for me to give them food, and they would just go ballistic. So just the trauma that they would have to go through on a daily basis, and we're not even talking about any mental disability that they may have. That would also trigger them. So I think we've like Bostic said, we have to get more training. They definitely need more help in that area.
I think trauma is the underlying theme across the board, right? Whether it's you're experiencing trauma in the home, like what Bostic talked about, and so you choose to leave that environment, but now you're out on the streets. Like the first night sleeping on the streets could be your last. And then the trauma that comes from that experience, right? Not having a stable roof over your head, not knowing where your next meal is going to come from. So that, glad you brought up trauma, because that is an incredibly big part of, this story. And I think a lot of times the lack of knowledge about not just people experiencing homelessness, but trauma, mental health, like all of that can also be a really big barrier to getting people stably housed. If we're not taking into consideration, mental health and trauma experiences, something I hear all the time is, well, why are you sleeping on the street? Why don't you just go to a shelter? Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned, it's not, it's doesn't feel safe. I worked with a young lady in the past in therapy services that had recently been placed in a housing program and had spent several months sleeping on the streets prior, and we couldn't figure out, after she had housing, why was she continuing to sleep outside and on a bench outside of her apartment? Well, that being inside of a house, she had acclimated to being outside, doing what she needed to do to survive. Being inside of an apartment by herself was incredibly triggering, did not feel safe. She was used to having, a group of people around her that helped with that safety, and now to be in an apartment by herself, you would think that would be the goal, to have a roof over your head, someplace that is yours, you can turn the key. It didn't feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, homelessness, or experiencing homelessness, it changes people. And it may cause them to do things they normally wouldn't do. So I think one of the ways that we think homelessness looks like is that they're criminals, or that they have low morals or whatnot. But if I am desperate and I'm hungry and I'm on the street, I may never have shoplifted before. But right now I'm hungry. So because of I'm experiencing homelessness, that may actually lead me now to start shoplifting. Or it may lead me to start squatting in other abandoned buildings or abandoned apartments where I normally would never have done that. But now that I am experiencing homelessness, I'm doing that, People panhandling. A lot of people were very prideful before they started experiencing homelessness and very self-sufficient, but now I'm desperate and I have nothing else to do but to ask. Even today, I have a young lady that came into the center, and her game plan is to go and give plasma today so she can earn some money so that she can survive over the weekend. And a year ago, it really touched my heart because I had a young lady who was kind of rushing us for services but not being rude, and she finally said, I have to go and give plasma so that I can go and pay to get my background check done so I can start my job on Monday and also use some of that plasma money to pay for childcare. And it just broke my heart that you have to sell your blood in order to support your children, or in order to get a job. So a lot of experiencing homelessness can change people and cause them to then fall into some of those stereotypes that they were never really destined for. And, whether you're experiencing homelessness or not, a mother or a parent's love for their child is the same. So people who are not homeless will give their right leg for their children. People that are experiencing homelessness will also give their right leg and sometimes compromise their freedom or compromise their morals and their values for the sake of their children. And that also opens up something we haven't talked about, which is trafficking and sex work, even trafficking oneself or being trafficked by other people, that for a lot of people, especially young ladies, is a way to make money, quick money. And I may have never done this before I experienced homelessness, but enough of homelessness, enough time in homelessness, there's no telling what I might do to support myself and support my kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not as easy as just like, okay, I just want housing now, let me go get it, right? Even if someone is trying to get into shelter or get into permanent housing and, they want it. We want housing. We want to be safe and happy and stable, but the shelters are always full. It's hard to get a bed. You have to meet certain requirements. We talked a lot about the families needing to separate in order to even access certain shelters. Permanent housing, there's all these weird specific definitions that you have to fit into and that you have to prove to someone. It's basically I have to show on paper that I've experienced this amount of trauma in order for me to get access to this type of permanent housing solution. So it's not as easy as just going into the shelter system and then getting the help. There's all these other barriers even inside the homelessness system that's supposed to help those people out of that situation. You know, so it's a very long, ongoing, personal experience, you know, for someone to even access the most basic of services. And, you know.
A couple of weeks ago, Jenna and I were working with a client who was escaping domestic violence. We were able to get her in the emergency hotel room for a couple of days until we could do a longer plan. That evening, the problem was that she tried to check into the hotel. She only had a copy of her ID. She didn't have the original hard copy of the ID. The hotel flat out would not let her stay there, even though we had paid for the hotel in full ahead of time and they had their money. You know, it was hard for me because I could not tell them, okay, she's escaping domestic violence. Her husband has her purse, trying to hold her hostage. That's why she doesn't have the hard copy of the ID. I couldn't say that for two reasons. One is HIPAA, but then two, the hotel might have said, well, we don't want that drama in our hotel. If that's her situation, we don't want him coming here. But it really put her in a bind with her two kids because he has her ID, you know, and that's a part of that domestic violence is that control. And not really having that freedom. So that just created another hardship that I get why the ID is necessary, but here's a situation where she doesn't have it, but you still have, you know, kids in question that are sleeping in cars and are experiencing this homelessness.
So I've got a question, and someone wants to know, why do you use the term experiencing homelessness instead of saying this person who is homeless?
That is people first language. It's to bring humanity back into someone's experience. Homelessness is not everything that somebody is. They are human. They are people. They deserve respect and love and support and to be seen as human and not less than. And that language is really important, especially in this population, because people tend to look down on people in that situation and kind of see them as something less than an actual person. So people first language, a person experiencing homelessness kind of like reiterates that point, like this is a human going through a very hard time right now.
And homelessness is not a permanent state. It is a temporary state. So I'm experiencing this right now. This does not define me because I'm still educated. I still have whatever degrees I have. I still have whatever skill sets. I still have my upbringing. There's so many other things that define me than just my housing status. And my housing status, like hopefully, is temporary.
Yeah, that can happen to any of us. Any of us. No matter how successful, how wealthy, anything. Anybody could be in that situation tomorrow. Yeah.
So what would you all say to someone who says homeless people are lazy or should just get a job?
I think that people that believe that find a comfort in separating themselves from people experiencing homelessness, because it's almost like an issue that they don't actually want to learn about or address. So in order, I think it's comfortable for someone to blame that person rather than kind of admit that like a system that we exist in isn't necessarily working for these people. I think that's an unempathetic, uneducated type of view that someone could have on someone experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, just to answer that question, just to give feedback. I think it's, again, I just want to compartmentalize myself. I see someone hurting, and I know I'm supposed to give care or some kind of sympathy to them, but I don't want to because how they dress or how they look. And so I can justify it by saying that they're lazy, that they don't want to work, and that way I feel comfortable ignoring them or being mean to them or whatever.
So what would you say are ways that people can help those experiencing homelessness?
I guess first things first
would just be to have
Empathy.
empathy, right? Just understand that, like Jenna said, it could be any of us tomorrow. It could be someone that you know experiencing it now and you'd have no idea. There's a lot of times the not in my backyard effect, like people deserve to be housed, but not here, right? Not where I can see it, but just really like just having empathy and understanding that no one asks to be in that situation. There's always contributing factors. A lot of times people don't have control over those. So seeing people experiencing homelessness as people, right, as humans, as people that are deserving of empathy and compassion. No one wants to have to sleep under a bridge when it's 35 degrees outside.
I think another major way people can help is just like coming forward to tell their own story, to redefine what homelessness is, right? So you have a Tyler Perry, and that's an extreme example, but that's still someone who experienced homelessness, who has told his story to be able to say you can make it. And we all may not become billionaires, but we can still get beyond it. But there are so many people that have experienced homelessness that stay quiet about it. And when you stay quiet about it, what prevails are all the stereotypes and all the negative ways of thinking about folk. And when you do this work, I get people all the time, volunteers and donors and other people come up and say, you know, I slept in my car for 6 months. I was this, I was that. And I'm like, okay, you need to tell the world. You need to have a different face on it, because when you see someone who is successful and then learn that they've experienced homelessness, and it's like, okay, well, there's hope. You know, and not everybody, again, falls into this, chronic homelessness, though there are some that do. But I think for people who've experienced it, by telling their story, how they experienced it and now have, become stable, become successful, have housing, that helps to redefine it for other people, and it helps to give hope. It also helps to say that some of these temporary supports that we provide are true bridges from experiencing homelessness to actually experiencing housing stability.
It's getting colder now, so obviously, a lot of donations would be beneficial for people who, A, can't get into the shelter, or B, would prefer to stay outside because they don't want to go into a shelter. Lots of blankets, hats, coats, and good quality donations. We're not a trash can. These people are people, again, just to reiterate, and deserve good quality items to protect themselves over the next few months. Also, when people are moving into permanent housing, we always want to fill that apartment or home with furniture to make it a little bit more like you're coming home or you're going home, rather than you're sleeping in another bando, or it kind of brings a sense of ownership and pride into moving into their next phase of their life. Also community support. People have been so isolated while experiencing homelessness, so it's nice to kind of introduce them to other communities who are able to support them and build that natural support system outside of agencies like ours, who are providing more immediate, tangible services. So that community-based emotional health, support is something that would be awesome too.
I think also getting involved, right? Being an advocate. There's larger systemic issues here. Affordable housing is limited, extremely limited. Talk to your legislator. Talk to anyone in positions of power that can help us advocate to make some of these changes on a larger platform.
For me, it's experiencing dignity. That even though I may be experiencing homelessness, I'm still human, as Jenna pointed out earlier, and can be treated with dignity. And there's a way to turn someone down if they ask you for money or ask you for help in the street without making them feel less than, without making them feel like they're the scum of the earth. You don't always have to give if you're not in a position to give, but you don't have to be rude. You can still show some compassion. You can still show some dignity. And one way that we're doing that real quick is in our distribution. We've stopped pre-bagging food. We lay the food out, give the community folk food bags when they come up, and we let them choose the items that they want. It eliminates food waste because then they're not taking things they're not going to eat, but it also just gives them the power of choice, that I can now choose what I want instead of just being given and forced to take stuff. So just finding ways just to show dignity regardless of people's situations.
Well, I think that sums up today's conversation so well. Providing dignity. It is essential to the work that we do here at Chris 180. And it is important as we are in the giving spirit, as we are in this season of Thanksgiving and season of gratitude, that we really take a moment to be thankful for all that we have in our lives. And that we reach out to others who may not have those things we do. Here at Chris 180, there's easy ways to get involved, as Jenna said. You can make a donation of items, high quality items. You can advocate. You can support. You can do one step today. So make that pledge to yourself that you want to be involved and that you want to help someone who may be experiencing homelessness. There's an easy way to do it, and it's coming up next week. Giving Tuesday is Tuesday, November 30th. It is one of the biggest giving days of the year. And whether you can give $5 or $500 or $5,000 to Chris 180, your donations will help us make an impact on those experiencing homelessness and those who need extra support this holiday season. Many people are just 1 week, one check away from being in a dire situation. And by giving at any amount, you can help us make that difference. We would love to have you a part of our Giving Tuesday family. And every donation made on Tuesday, November 30th, that's in 1 week, less than 1 week, will be doubled. We thank you for being here. We wish you a happy and safe Thanksgiving season.